It was the spring of 1945, and Europe was on fire one last time. The Allied armies were pushing through the final ruins of Nazi Germany, grinding forward on tired tanks and thinner hope. Among the endless columns of olive-drab vehicles rumbling toward victory was one machine that had seen too much, a battered Sherman tank, its armor scorched, its engine coughing like an old man's lungs. The men inside called it Vera, though no one quite remembered why. By then, every tank had a woman's name, good luck charms painted in white on steel that rarely came back whole. But on this morning, Vera had something no other tank did, a woman keeping her alive. Her name was Corporal Lily Anderson, though most in her regiment just called her Fixer. At 23, she was one of the few female mechanics attached to a frontline armored division. Technically, she wasn't supposed to be that close to combat. Regulations said women stayed in the rear service units, but wars have a way of ignoring regulations. Lily had been repairing tanks since 1943, when she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service and trained with the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. Her hands were small but strong, her mind sharp, and her courage something that didn't show until she was knee-deep in mud with an engine apart before dawn. That morning near the German town of Paderborn, the tank column had stalled. The lead Sherman's engine had blown a gasket after taking a hit from a Panzerfaust. Fuel leaked onto the wet ground and the engine block was cracked in 2 places. The men cursed, smoked, and waited for orders. They couldn't move forward until every tank was running and artillery fire was already echoing from the woods ahead. The commander barked, "Get the mechanic up here." A few seconds later, Lily came running down the road, a wrench in one hand, her khaki uniform soaked with rain. "What have you done to her this time?" she asked, kneeling beside the smoking hull. The driver, a Scottish corporal, grinned nervously. "She coughed, rattled, and gave up, same as the rest of us." Lily ignored him, running her fingers along the engine casing. Hot oil and diesel smeared her hands black. She listened to the ticking metal as if the tank itself were trying to speak. Then she muttered, "She's not dead yet." The officer in charge, Lieutenant Parker, was skeptical. "Be quick, Anderson, we move in 20 minutes. Lily didn't look up. "Then give me 25 and a miracle." She climbed onto the back deck and began pulling off the inspection plates. The rain came harder, running down her face as she worked. Inside the compartment, the air reeked of burnt fuel and desperation. One look told her the truth. The engine couldn't be fixed properly without parts they didn't have. The nearest depot was miles away and they had no transport. But Lily had learned long ago that sometimes the difference between a broken tank and a moving one was imagination. She shouted for her tool kit and a spare length of copper tubing. The men scrambled to help, half curious, half doubtful. As shells whistled somewhere in the distance, Lily tore open the radiator assembly, cut away a melted pipe, and began fashioning a makeshift bypass using a piece of copper line and the sleeve of her own jacket as insulation. She worked fast, her mind running on instinct. Years of improvising in muddy fields had taught her that machines didn't care about rules, they cared about rhythm, balance, and faith. When the lieutenant checked in again, he saw her crouched inside the open engine compartment, covered in grease up to her elbows. "You're wasting your time," he said. Lily didn't even look up. "Sir, if I don't fix her, your entire column sits here till the Germans find us, so unless you've got a better plan, hand me that spanner." Something in her tone made him obey. For nearly an hour she worked under fire, hammering, sealing, tightening, until the engine looked less like machinery and more like a piece of sculpture held together by willpower. The other soldiers watched in tense silence. Somewhere nearby, an artillery shell landed with a dull thud. The ground trembled, but she didn't flinch. Finally, she climbed down, wiped her hands on her jacket, and nodded to the driver. "Try her." The man hesitated, then pressed the ignition. The engine groaned, sputtered, and fell silent. Lily frowned. Again. The second time it coughed louder. On the third try, the Sherman came to life, its engine roaring through the rain like an angry beast awakening. A cheer rose from the men, echoing across the ruined field. The lieutenant grinned for the first time that day. "Well, I'll be damned," Lily smiled faintly. "No, sir, just British engineering." The column began to move again, the tanks clanking forward through the mud toward the town ahead. Lily rode on the back of Vera, clutching her wrench like a talisman. Every few minutes she leaned down to listen for signs of failure, the rhythm of pistons, the hiss of pressure. The fix wouldn't last forever. She knew that, but it didn't have to. It only needed to last long enough to get them through the day. By dusk they reached the outskirts of Paderborn. Smoke curled above the rooftops and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the rain. The tanks formed a line on a muddy road bordered by shattered trees. The crew of Vera climbed out to rest, exhausted but alive. Lily sat beside the tank, eating cold rations, her fingers still trembling from adrenaline. One of the men, Private Mills, offered her a cigarette. She shook her head. "If I start, I'll never stop." The lieutenant approached and crouched beside her. "Anderson, that was damn fine work. You saved the column," she shrugged. "Just did my job, sir," he smiled. "No, you did more than that. You gave us a chance." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You know, if that engine gives out again, we'll need you up front tomorrow." Lily nodded, glancing toward the horizon where thunder and artillery blended into one sound. Then I'll be there. That night she slept inside the tank, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of oil and smoke. In the darkness, the men's voices faded one by one until only the distant thunder remained. She dreamed of her father's garage in Birmingham, of the smell of petrol and metal, and of how he used to say machines had souls if you listened hard enough. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's why Vera still ran. The next morning before dawn, the sky burned red. The radio crackled with orders. Their unit was to push through a narrow pass and cut off a retreating German column. The Sherman's patched engine groaned to life under Lily's careful hand. The other tanks followed, their tracks grinding over frozen mud. But halfway through the pass, disaster struck. A hidden German anti-tank gun opened fire from the ridge. The first shell hit the lead vehicle, blowing its turret sky-high. The second shell tore through the road behind Vera. Blocking the retreat, smoke and fire filled the narrow defile. The crew ducked, shouting over the noise. Inside the chaos, the Sherman's engine sputtered again. The makeshift copper line Lily had installed rattled loose under the vibration. Steam hissed. She knew it could blow at any second. Without thinking, she climbed out of the hatch, ignoring the bullets whizzing past. The lieutenant screamed, "Anderson, get down!" She didn't hear him. Crawling along the side of the tank, she tore off a strip of her undershirt, wrapped it around the leaking pipe, and hammered it tight with the butt of her wrench. The engine roared back to life just as the tank's gun fired, blasting the ridge where the enemy gun had been hiding. When the smoke cleared, the path ahead was open. Vera rolled forward, dragging the column with her, the last Sherman in the line now leading the way. By evening, they reached the German defensive line and broke through. The battle was over by nightfall. The official report later noted that a single improvised engine repair allowed the armored column to continue its advance and secure the objective. It didn't mention the name of the mechanic who made it happen. After the war, Lily returned to England quietly, without medals or headlines. She went back to her father's garage, fixing tractors instead of tanks. When asked about the war, she rarely spoke. But sometimes, when an old car engine coughed to life under her touch, she would smile faintly and whisper, "That's it, girl, just one more mile." Decades later, her story was rediscovered in a bundle of faded Army reports. Historians pieced it together: the woman mechanic who kept the last Sherman rolling when everything else had stopped. Her improvised fix, nothing more than copper tubing and courage, had kept an entire battalion alive long enough to reach victory. No one remembered her face, but her work had become part of the machine's legend. And somewhere in a museum beneath the steel shell of a weathered Sherman tank, a small plaque bears her name: Corporal Lily Anderson, the Fixer. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, turning every road into a slick river of mud. The tanks crawled forward like weary giants, their treads grinding through the muck, engines roaring under the strain. Lily rode on the back of Vera again, wrapped in a damp blanket, her hands blackened by grease and soot. The air smelled of diesel and gunpowder, and the constant thrum of machinery felt like the heartbeat of a dying world. Each mile brought them deeper into Germany, and though the war was nearly over, it seemed to grow more dangerous the closer they came to victory. That morning the convoy reached a small farming village half in ruins. The fields were littered with broken tractors and burned-out wagons. An old church stood at the center, its steeple cracked in half by shellfire. The soldiers moved cautiously through the streets, their boots splashing through puddles. Lily followed on foot, carrying her toolkit like a priest might carry a Bible. She had learned long ago that her tools were her only weapon, and in war keeping a machine alive was sometimes the same as saving a dozen men. They set up a temporary repair post inside the remains of a barn. The roof was gone, and sunlight spilled through the gaps, catching dust and ash as it drifted down like slow snow. There were 3 tanks waiting for her attention, one with a jammed turret, another with a cracked gearbox, and Vera, her own charge, running on a prayer and a patchwork of metal. She worked without pause, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her mind operating in a rhythm all its own. Around her, soldiers came and went, shouting orders, lighting cigarettes, and occasionally glancing at her with the same mix of awe and disbelief. Word had spread about what she had done in the past, the miracle fix, they called it. Some swore she was half mechanic, half magician. The lieutenant even joked that she could probably fix a tank with a teaspoon and a prayer. Lily didn't laugh. To her, it hadn't been a miracle. It had been desperation, instinct, and luck bound together by the refusal to quit. Every bolt she turned reminded her that failure meant someone wouldn't make it home. She couldn't let that happen. That evening, as the men gathered around a small fire to eat, she sat a little apart, polishing her tools under the faint light. Private Mills came over holding 2 tin cups of tea. "Thought you could use one," he said. She accepted it with a small smile. "Thanks, you make a better cup than most officers." He laughed, then hesitated. "They're saying the war might end any week now. Can you believe it?" She looked into the fire, the reflection dancing in her eyes. "Maybe, but machines don't believe in peace. They just stop when people do." He didn't quite understand what she meant, but he liked the sound of it. Later that night, a storm rolled in and thunder shook the sky. Lily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Vera's engine, the copper line, the patched radiator, the things that could fail at any moment. She got up quietly, grabbed her lantern, and went outside to check. The rain came down in sheets, soaking her to the bone as she climbed onto the tank. The engine ticked faintly in the cold. She ran her hand over the metal, feeling for heat, for weakness, for something only she could sense. That's when she noticed the smell, faint but sharp, a whiff of fuel. Somewhere inside, there was another leak. By dawn, she had found it, a hairline crack near the fuel pump spreading like a spiderweb. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but one bad bump on the road and it could rupture. She didn't have the right parts to fix it. She stared at the damage, teeth chattering, and then glanced at the sky, turning pale with early light. "All right, girl," she whispered to the tank. "We'll make it work again." She cut away a section of rubber hose from an abandoned Jeep nearby, trimmed it to size, and fastened it with a clamp made from a piece of a ration tin. It wasn't pretty, but it held. By the time the soldiers woke, the engine was humming again. When the lieutenant saw her that morning, soaked and covered in grease, he shook his head. "Do you ever sleep, Anderson?" She smiled faintly. "Tanks don't, sir. Why should I?" He laughed, but his eyes held something like admiration. "You're wasted as a corporal. When this war over, I'll see to it you get a medal." She shrugged. "I don't want a medal, just a working engine." 2 days later, orders came through. The division was to advance toward the Weser River. The Germans were falling back fast, but their rearguard still fought fiercely. As the tanks rolled out, Lily rode inside the half-track behind Vera, watching the line of armored beasts thunder forward. The countryside blurred past burned barns, empty roads, fields where the snow was streaked with soot. They crossed small towns filled with silent faces peering from doorways. Children waved white cloths. Old men just stared. War had become a tide that swept through without mercy, leaving nothing clean behind. Midway through the advance, the radio crackled with static and panic. One of the Shermans up front had hit a mine and caught fire. The column halted. Smoke poured into the sky as medics ran forward. Lily climbed out before anyone told her to, grabbing her kit and running toward the burning tank. She could feel the heat before she even reached it. The engine compartment was engulfed, but the fire hadn't reached the ammo yet. 2 of the crew were dragging a wounded man out. Lily dropped to her knees beside them and helped pull him clear. His uniform was scorched, his face gray with shock. She pressed a hand to his chest, faint heartbeat. "He's alive," she said, and shouted for a medic. When the flames finally died down, she climbed onto the wreck, coughing through the smoke. Most would have left it there, a burned-out husk, but she refused. Every tank mattered. She pried open the back panel and stared at the ruined engine. The metal had melted in places, but she noticed something: the main fuel feed line was still intact. She unbolted it, cut it free, and wrapped it carefully in her jacket. Back at the camp, she cleaned the soot off the salvaged part and stored it in her kit. To anyone else it was scrap, to her it was gold. That night, as she sat alone by the fire, the lieutenant came over. "You saved another man today," he said quietly, "and you went into a burning tank. That's not your job." She stared into the flames. "My job, to keep them moving. I don't care how." He nodded slowly. "When this war ends, Anderson, they'll forget most of our names, but they'll remember the machines that brought us here. You gave them life." She said nothing, but inside something tightened, not pride, not sorrow, just the knowledge that he was right. The next morning they pushed on again. The war was collapsing, but danger still hid in every mile. As they neared the river crossing, Vera began to sputter again. The patched copper tube was vibrating loose, and the improvised hose from the Jeep was leaking under pressure. Lily could hear it before anyone else did, the faint hiss of a failing system. She told the driver to stop, but before they could pull over, German mortars opened up from the far bank. The world exploded in sound and dust. The crew shouted, the ground shook, and Lily found herself thrown against the hull. The lieutenant yelled for them to move, but the tank wouldn't start. Smoke filled the compartment. She climbed up again under fire, tools clutched in one shaking hand. Bullets snapped through the air, pinging off the armor. She could feel the heat of the engine beneath her boots. Somewhere behind her, men were shouting her name, but she didn't listen. She tore open the panel, ripped off the damaged hose, and replaced it with the one she had salvaged from the burned-out tank 2 days earlier. It fit perfectly, as if destiny itself had been waiting for that moment. She tightened the clamps, slammed the hatch shut, and banged on the turret. "Try it now," she screamed. The engine roared to life, louder than the guns. The Sherman surged forward, its treads churning through the mud. The others followed, crossing the bridge under a hail of fire. It wasn't bravery that kept her steady, it was obsession, the need to keep the heart of the machine beating no matter what. When they finally broke through the enemy line and reached the far bank, she collapsed against the hull, laughing and crying all at once. The men around her cheered. Even the lieutenant, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, clapped her on the shoulder. "You're either the luckiest woman in Europe," he said, "or the bravest." She just smiled weakly. "No, sir, just stubborn." That night, when the camp fell silent and only the crackle of fires remained, Lily sat beside Vera one last time. She listened to the steady ticking of the engine as it cooled, a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. Somewhere beyond the trees, the guns were still firing, but the rhythm of that machine told her something she'd never dared to believe before. the war was ending and they had made it. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of stillness that made soldiers nervous. The battle near the Weser had ended, but the echoes of it seemed to hang in the air, drifting between the shattered trees and smoking wrecks. The men moved quietly, cleaning their weapons, patching their tanks, and counting the ones who wouldn't wake up. Lily sat by Vera's engine once more, her hands moving automatically, tightening bolts, checking fluids, listening for the faint, irregular heartbeat of the machine she had come to know better than most people. Her knuckles were raw, her uniform stiff with dried oil, but her mind refused to rest. Every noise, every tremor from the tank meant something. The men said she could hear a misfire before it happened, that she could feel when a part was about to break. Maybe they were right. The war had become a waiting game now. Word came through the radio that Hitler was trapped in Berlin and that the German lines were collapsing fast. "It'll be over soon," Lieutenant Parker said as he walked past her. "Just hold on a little longer." Lily gave a half-smile without looking up. "That's what I've been telling Vera for weeks." He chuckled, shaking his head, but there was a heaviness in his eyes too. Everyone knew that the closer the end came, the more dangerous it became. Desperate armies fought hardest when they knew they were finished. Later that day they moved out again, the convoy heading east toward a town called Hamelin. The roads were worse than ever, bomb craters, fallen trees, wrecked vehicles blocking their way. Civilians walked along the ditches, carrying what little they owned, their faces gray with hunger. A German woman holding a child stopped as Vera passed. She stared at the British flag painted on the tank's side, and then with a look of weary gratitude she nodded. Lily caught the gesture and felt something stir inside her, a small, painful reminder that humanity still flickered beneath all this ruin. By midday the convoy reached a small ridge overlooking the river valley. From there they could see smoke rising in thin columns from the villages ahead. The sky was streaked with ash and sunlight. The lieutenant called a halt and ordered the tanks to fan out. They were to secure the crossing before nightfall. The enemy had pulled back, but snipers still haunted the woods, and there were rumors of mines along the road. The engineers went forward first, carefully sweeping the ground. The rest waited in tense silence, engines idling. Lily climbed down from Vera and stretched her aching arms. Her fingers were swollen and cracked from the cold. She had been awake for nearly 30 hours, but her body had forgotten how to feel tired. As she leaned against the tank, Private Mills came up beside her, holding a piece of chocolate he'd been saving. "Here," he said, offering it shyly. "You earned it." She took it, smiling faintly. "If I eat this, Vera will get jealous." He laughed. "You treat that tank like she's alive." She looked at him and said quietly, "She is. She's carried us this far, hasn't she?" He didn't argue. Everyone in the unit felt the same way. The tank wasn't just metal anymore, it was home, protector, and ghost all in one. That afternoon the engineers finished clearing the path and the order came to move. As the tanks rolled forward down the muddy slope, the sound of distant gunfire began again. Sporadic, panicked, the dying gasp of an army in retreat. But fate, it seemed, wasn't ready to let them go easily. Halfway down the ridge, Vera's engine let out a harsh metallic clang, followed by a shudder that ran through the entire vehicle. Lily froze. The copper pipe she'd patched days ago had finally cracked beyond repair. The radiator hissed violently, steam pouring out in clouds. The driver shouted, "We're losing pressure," and slammed the brakes. The tank lurched to a halt, blocking the road. "Not again," the lieutenant muttered. "Anderson, do something." She didn't answer. She was already climbing up onto the rear deck, wrench in hand, steam burning her arms as she reached into the compartment. The heat was unbearable, but she worked through it, muttering to herself, "Come on, girl, don't you die on me now." The copper line was split clean open, the patch completely blown out. There was no replacement this time, no spare pipe, no nearby wreck to scavenge from. She ripped off the sleeve of her uniform and wrapped it around the crack, tightening it with wire, but the steam kept forcing through. She coughed, eyes stinging from the heat. "I need something to seal it," she shouted. Private Mills threw her a small tin of ration butter. "Try this." She hesitated only a second before scooping it out and smearing it over the tear, pressing her sleeve against it. The grease began to harden under the heat, forming a crude seal. "Start her up," she yelled, and the driver turned the key. The engine sputtered, then steadied. The patch held, for now. "Move," the lieutenant ordered. "We're sitting ducks." The convoy started forward again, Vera limping but alive. Lily stayed crouched on the back, holding the patch in place with both hands, the heat burning through her skin. Every second felt like an hour. Bullets cracked through the trees, pinging off the armor. One hit close enough to make her flinch, but she didn't let go. Finally, they cleared the woods and rolled onto open ground. The firing stopped. When they halted at the riverbank, she slid off the tank and collapsed to her knees. Her palms were blistered, the sleeve of her uniform half melted to her arm. The medics rushed over, but she waved them off. "Later," she said weakly. "Check the engine first." The lieutenant knelt beside her. "You're bleeding, Anderson." She smiled faintly. "So's Vera." He laughed despite himself, then called for a medic anyway. They bandaged her arms while the engine hissed quietly beside them, still running. That night the soldiers built small fires along the riverbank. The air was filled with the scent of wet grass and smoke. Across the water the Germans were retreating, the sound of trucks echoing faintly in the dark. Lily sat near the fire, her arms wrapped in white cloth. She stared at the flames without speaking. Private Mills brought her a tin of soup and set it beside her. "You know," he said softly, "if there's a heaven for machines, Vera is going to be there waiting for you." She laughed under her breath. "If there's a heaven for mechanics, it's a place where engines never stall." Later that night, the lieutenant came to sit beside her. He handed her a cigarette. "You've earned one, Anderson." She took it this time, the smoke curled upward, glowing faintly in the firelight. "You know," he said, "we might cross into Berlin soon. It's almost done." She nodded. "Feels strange, doesn't it, to fight so long for peace that you don't know what to do when it's close?" He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "What will you do after?" She thought for a long time before answering. "Fix things, I suppose. That's all I know how to do." Before dawn, the order came to cross the river. The engineers had built a makeshift pontoon bridge, creaking and swaying under the weight of the tanks. The sky was turning pale as Vera rolled forward, engine rumbling low, water splashing against the sides. Lily sat inside the hull this time, her bandaged hands resting on her knees. She could feel every vibration of the machine, every pulse. When they reached the far bank, she exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the entire time. They were on the other side. Germany's heartland lay ahead. For the next 2 days, they advanced without resistance. Town after town surrendered before they arrived. The people were exhausted, defeated, almost relieved. Children came out holding white sheets, old women offered bread. The soldiers didn't know how to react. After years of hate, the quiet felt foreign. Lily kept working, keeping Vera alive mile after mile. The copper pipe was holding for now, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. Every time the engine roared, she listened for that one wrong sound that would mean the end, but it never came. On April 29th, they received the message everyone had been waiting for. "Berlin has fallen, the Führer is dead, the war in Europe is effectively over." The words echoed through the static of the radio and then through the camp. For a long time no one spoke. The men just stood there staring at each other. Some laughed, some cried, others simply sat down, unable to process what they'd just heard. Lily climbed onto Vera's deck, looking out at the gray morning sky. The tank's metal was streaked with mud and soot, its paint chipped, its body dented, but it still ran. She placed her palm on the engine cover, feeling the warmth beneath her hand. "We made it," she whispered. That night, as they lit their final campfire on German soil, the lieutenant raised a mug. "To Vera," he said, "and to the fixer." The men cheered, their voices echoing into the quiet fields. Lily smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She didn't say anything. For her, victory wasn't loud or triumphant. It was the hum of an engine that refused to die, the stubborn pulse of a machine that kept rolling through hell until peace finally caught up. When she finally lay down to sleep, she dreamed not of war or fire or engines, but of silence, of roads without smoke, of machines resting under clear skies. Somewhere in the dream, she heard her father's voice again, soft and proud. "You kept her running, Lily. You kept them all running." And for the first time in years, she believed him. The war ended not with an explosion but with silence, a silence so deep it frightened those who had lived too long among the noise. The guns fell quiet. The tanks idled for the last time. The air smelled of rain, smoke, and something strange, peace. For days the men didn't know what to do with their hands, their routines, their thoughts. They cleaned weapons that would no longer fire, polished engines that would no longer roar. Some laughed too loudly, others stared into nothing for hours. Lily Anderson did what she had always done, she worked. The column was ordered to stay in a small German town for several weeks while the surrender was formalized. The people there were half-starved but polite, terrified and grateful in equal measure. The war had turned them into ghosts. The British soldiers shared rations, set up field kitchens and repaired what they could. For the first time, Lily found herself fixing tractors instead of tanks, helping farmers return to the fields. The work was easier, but the quiet unnerved her. Every hammer strike seemed too loud in the absence of gunfire. Vera, her beloved Sherman, was parked in a field near the edge of the village. Her paint was chipped, her armor dented, her engine scarred from months of improvisation, but she still looked proud even at rest. Lily visited her every day. She'd run her hands along the hull, checking bolts out of habit, whispering to the metal as if the machine could still hear. "You did good, girl, you did what no one thought you could." The men joked that she loved the tank more than any man. Maybe they were right. One afternoon, the lieutenant found her sitting on the turret, staring at the horizon. "Orders came through," he said. "They're sending most of us home next week." She nodded slowly. "And Vera, they'll scrap her," he said quietly. "Too battered to ship back, they're melting down the old machines for parts." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Scrap her," she repeated, disbelief tightening in her throat. "After all she's done," he sighed. "It's not my choice, Anderson, none of it is." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the barracks, listening to the rain against the roof. Every drop sounded like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. Just before dawn she got up, pulled on her jacket and walked to the field. The grass was wet and mist hung low around the hulking shape of the tank. She climbed onto the deck and sat there for a long time, her breath fogging in the cold. She knew the war was over, but it didn't feel like it. Peace was supposed to bring relief, but all she felt was emptiness. The next morning the dismantling began. Mechanics she didn't know, young men fresh from England, arrived with cutting torches and hammers. They worked methodically, stripping the old tanks for parts, engines pulled out, steel plates stacked like bones. When they reached Vera, Lily stood between them and the hull. "Not this one," she said firmly. The men hesitated. "Orders are orders," one of them muttered. She crossed her arms. "Then you'll have to go through me first." They laughed nervously, not sure if she was joking. The lieutenant intervened before it escalated. "Anderson," he said gently, "you can't save her." But she did, not the whole tank, but a part of it. She convinced the engineers to let her keep the engine block, the same one she had rebuilt, patched, and cursed through every mile of the campaign. It was useless metal to them, but to her it was history, memory, life. She arranged for it to be shipped back to England with the supply convoy. When she said goodbye to the men, they saluted her. Even the lieutenant, who had never saluted anyone below his rank, raised his hand. "You kept us moving," he said, "don't forget that." Back in Birmingham, the city was rebuilding. Streets still bore the scars of the Blitz, but factories were buzzing again, people laughing again, children playing where rubble once stood. Lily returned to her father's old garage. The tools were where he'd left them, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. For days she worked alone, repairing farm equipment, fixing old lorries, sometimes pausing just to listen to the hum of an engine. She kept Vera's engine block in the corner, cleaned and polished. It became her reminder of what she'd survived and what she'd lost. Years passed, the medals came, though she'd never asked for them. One from the Royal Engineers, another from the American unit she'd helped during the final advance. The newspapers wrote short stories about the fixer, the woman who kept the last Sherman rolling. She never corrected them, never told them about the nights she'd cried, the burns that never fully healed, or the dreams that woke her at 3 a.m. filled with the sound of engines dying in fire. To the world, she was a quiet war hero. To herself, she was just a mechanic who refused to give up. In the 1960s, the Army Museum requested her story. She donated the engine block, the wrenches she had carried through Europe, and the battered uniform sleeve with grease still embedded in the fabric. At the ceremony, an officer asked her to say a few words. She stood in front of the small crowd, veterans, students, and a few journalists, and hesitated. Then she said simply, "Machines don't fight wars, people do. But sometimes a machine becomes the only friend you have left." Vera wasn't just steel, she was proof that something broken can still carry you home. The audience stood in silence, then erupted into applause. After that, she rarely spoke of the war again. She grew older, her hands still strong, her voice still calm. Every year on Victory Day, she visited the museum. She would stand in front of the Sherman exhibit, run her fingers along the cool metal, and whisper the same words she had said that night in Germany. "We made it, girl." The attendants never disturbed her. They knew who she was. In her later years, Lily lived alone in a small cottage outside Birmingham. The neighbors said they could sometimes hear the faint hum of engines from her workshop late into the night. She told them she was just fixing things for local farmers, but the truth was, she couldn't stop listening for that sound, the steady heartbeat of machinery, the rhythm that had once kept her alive. One autumn evening, when the leaves had turned the color of rust, she sat in her workshop sipping tea as rain tapped softly on the windows. On her desk lay an old black and white photograph, the tank crew beside Vera, smiling through the mud, their faces young and fearless. She traced her finger along the image, stopping at the outline of the machine. "We did it," she murmured, "all of us." The clock ticked, the rain fell, and for a long while the world seemed at peace. When she passed away in 1989, her belongings were sorted by a historian from the museum. Among the tools and photographs, they found a small box with a note written in Lily's neat handwriting. "For whoever finds this, remember that victory is not the loudest moment in war. It's the quiet one after, when something broken still runs." Inside the box was a small piece of copper tubing, the same one she had used to patch Vera's engine all those years ago. Today in the Imperial War Museum, there is a display tucked between larger exhibits of grand battles and famous generals. It's small, almost easy to miss. A single piece of copper pipe, burned and twisted, resting beneath a faded photo of a woman in uniform. The plaque reads, "Corporal Lily Anderson, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, kept the last Sherman rolling to victory, April 1945. Visitors stop and read it, most moving on after a few seconds. But sometimes one lingers, a mechanic, a soldier, or someone who understands that courage isn't always loud. And maybe, if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear it, the faint thrum of an engine that refuses to die, echoing softly through the years."